Your next project is an object self-portrait. Stick around, let me explain what that means. The first thing we need to talk about is what is a portrait? A portrait is a painting or a drawing or a photograph, but it's of a person. It has to be a person that is the main subject of the artwork for it to count as a portrait. So your next project is going to be a portrait of a person. I explained just a minute ago that this was going to be an object self-portrait. So the next question to go over is, what is a self-portrait? For something to be a self-portrait, it has to be a painting or a drawing or a photograph of yourself that you are making. So here are some examples of some self-portraits that are done with some different media. For something to be a self-portrait, then you're going to actually have to be looking at yourself to make this portrait. You can see that in either of the paintings that are being made in these examples, that the person who's making the painting is looking in a mirror. That way they can see themselves. In the center, though, is an Andy Warhol photograph that he took with a camera looking at himself. You're probably familiar with selfies. And so it has to be a picture of yourself to count as a self-portrait. For your next assignment, you're going to be making a self-portrait, but it's an object self-portrait, meaning that for this self-portrait, you're actually not going to draw a person. You're going to draw yourself, but represented with objects. So I'm not asking you to draw people. In fact, I don't want you to draw people. For this assignment, if you have any human parts in your portrait, then it's technically not going to count. What we want to see is what types of objects or ideas or images could you put together to make a drawing or a painting that represents you, but it's not actually a picture of you. So be brainstorming and thinking about what kind of things could you make a piece of art with that could represent who you are or your interests or the things that you like to do and stuff like that. Let me show you an example. All right, now I just explained that you're going to be making a portrait for your next project. And then I also told you that you can't have a person in it. So the challenge here is, how can you make a piece of artwork that represents you without showing a picture of you? So it needs to be things about your personality, things that we can't actually see. And so you're probably going to be starting with a list and coming up with a list of ideas. And then we're actually going to make the piece of artwork, it's going to be super duper choice based. Here's the example that I already have. So this right here is my object self-portrait. So this is a self-portrait, meaning that this drawing right here represents me. It represents things about my personality or things that I like, interests that I have, hobbies that I have, and I made mine a drawing. You are going to get to choose what materials you use for this project. Now, me personally, I went with just black and white, and I used a pen to make mine. But a bunch of you might decide that you would actually prefer to use colored pencils or maybe watercolor for yours. So all of these things are options. Pencil, colored pencil, paints, pen, and then feel free to mix and match too. But before we really get into the types of art materials that we're going to use, the media, let's talk about your idea, because that's what day one is all about. So when I came up with my ideas for this, the first things I thought about were, what are things that I like to do? What are my hobbies? And so first, I came up with art. The next thing I thought about was other things I like to do. I like gardening, so I thought about gardening. And so plants So think about images, things that you could draw that could represent the things that you like to do. My favorite animal, so I decided to draw my cat. And then I need something else about me. And so the last thing I went with was I really like to be outside and I like to be in the outdoors. So this was the list that I came up with. I like art, I like gardening, and so I want to have plants. I like my cat, and I like being outside. And so the next step is going to be to figure out, okay, how can you represent this list of things? So for art, I could do anything, but what I went with was the art supplies. So I thought about things like paintbrushes, pencils, and other art supplies that I've used to make any of the art that I've ever made. Another thing, gardening. So I decided to make a flower pot to represent gardening. So there's my flower pot. To represent plants, I just picked some plants that I like. I know how to draw lilies, so I decided to go with a lily. And then, you know, I thought about other leaves and things to go along with. So plants and then my cat. I draw my cat all the time. So I drew my cat. And then outside, I had to think about how am I going to represent being outdoors in this? I already have plants, so how can I do this? And so I went with the sky. So being outside under the sky. And so I put in clouds and I put in a sun. And so these were my ideas. This was my brainstorming page here. And then what I ended up with when I was finished, this was my finished product. So be thinking about a list of ideas to represent your self-portrait using objects. Here is today's to-do list. Your first step, step 1, is brainstorming. Make a list. Come up with 5 to 7 objects or ideas or things that could represent who you are or your interests or something about you. 5 to 7 ideas. Then step 2 is you're going to sketch out your ideas. They don't have to be beautiful drawings. You saw my sketches. They were pretty simple and quick. And then your assignment for today is going to be to turn in a picture of your brainstorming page.